Hi, I'm Joan Daigle, and I'm going to be talking to you about John of Antioch, also known as St. John Chrysostom. John Chrysostom was not simply Bishop of Constantinople, but is honored as a doctor of the Church, both in the Roman Catholic and in the Greek Orthodox churches. We possess more of his homilies and writings than any of the other Greek fathers. This was largely due to the fact that his preaching was so popular that stenographers would take note as he preached. John was born in 347 AD in Antioch, a city of the eastern part of the Roman Empire. He was educated in some of the best schools, and as a teenager was taught by a famous rhetorician, one who is an expert in rhetoric. The rhetorician known as Libanius felt that John had surpassed him in both eloquence and in the power of persuasion. As a pagan, Libanius was said to have remarked, quote, "It is a pity that the boy is a Christian. Otherwise, he could be my successor." This was the background for John's outstanding sermons. The name Chrysostom was attributed to him, meaning golden-mouthed, because of his eloquence in preaching. It is said that he was the greatest preacher ever heard in a Christian pulpit. Although John was not included in any of the church's dogmatic councils, his preaching and writings addressed the concerns of the time, and many are quoted in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Before the age of 20, he met some hermits who impressed him. He joined them and for 4 years was mentored by them. This led him to spend the following 2 years in prayer and self-denial. But the austerities of this life took a toll on his health, and he returned to Antioch to convalesce. There he was noticed by the bishop, and in 386, he was ordained to the priesthood. The years of 386 to 398 were the period of the greatest theological productivity of Chrysostom, which assured him a place among the first doctors of the church. As early as in the year 392, St. Jerome referred to the great and successful activity of Chrysostom as a theological writer. His writings offered a treasure of dogmatic, moral, and historical knowledge. Even today, his preaching would be interesting and appropriate. For instance, when giving a homily on attendance at Mass, he said, quote, "I see that since the Feast of Pentecost, the attendance at divine service has fallen off. The prophets are neglected, the apostles are little valued, the fathers are set aside. There is divine service once a week, and even this day you cannot spend without the cares of business. Some say they are poor and must take care of making their living, while others have urgent business. As a matter of fact, the whole city is at the circus." Pointing out that the parish is a definite community of the Christian faithful, he wrote the following: "You cannot pray at home as a church. Where there is a great multitude, where exclamations are cried out to God as from one great heart, and where there is something more, the union of minds, the accord of souls, the bond of charity, and the prayers of the priests." But it was an incident which endeared him to the people of Antioch, which took place in the year after his ordination, when some citizens, angered by the added tax from the emperor, tore down the emperor's statues. The emperor Theodosius promised to severely punish the people of Antioch, so the bishop of Antioch fled to Constantinople to plead for the mercy of the citizens. During this time, John led the city in prayer and preached sermons to calm their fears. But he chastised them for what they had done to bring this upon the city. The emperor accepted the town's apology and canceled the punishment, but John had won the hearts of the faithful. One of John's most notable themes is the centrality of the Eucharistic sacrifice in the church, in life of the church. He insisted that the consecrated elements truly become the body and blood of Christ. He wrote, quote, "The priest in the role of Christ pronounces those words, but their power and grace are God's. This is my body," he says. "This word transforms the things offered," close quote. He reminded the faithful that in the Eucharist, we must approach it with fear and trembling. Quote, "Reflect, O man, what sacrificial flesh you take in your hand, to what table you will approach. Remember that you, though dust and ashes, do receive the blood and the body of Christ," close quote. In preaching on the rise and fall of man, he said, "Beloved, you know the achievement of Christ and glorious victory of the cross. Now let me tell you something even more remarkable, the manner in which he gained his victory, and you will marvel all the more. Christ conquered the devil using the same means and the same weapons that the devil used to win. The symbols of our fall were a virgin, a tree, and death. The virgin was Eve, for she had not yet known man. Then there was the tree, and death was Adam's penalty. Again, these three tokens of our destruction, the virgin, the tree, and death, became the tokens of our victory. Instead of Eve, there was Mary. Instead of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the wood of the cross. Instead of Adam's death, the death of Christ. Do you see then that the devil was defeated by the very means he used to conquer? John was attracted to St. Paul, perhaps because John was so much like Paul, tender, sincere, yet fiery, even severe at times. He was bold in calling out sin and challenging people to change. Although committed to an intense life of prayer and self-denial, he was in touch with the challenges and temptations of everyday life of the lay people. John was concerned about the well-being of people in the same manner as Paul, who was concerned and spoke out for the needs of the Gentiles. John prized marriage and family life and devoted many of his preachings on the married life. Quoting from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, it says, St. John Chrysostom suggested that husbands should say to their wives, "I have taken you in my arms, and I love you, and I prefer you to my life itself. For the present life is nothing, and my most ardent dream is to spend it with you in such a way that we may be assured of not being separated in the life reserved for us." We can see how people, especially married women, were enthralled by John's preaching. In 398 AD, the Patriarch of Constantinople died. The emperor wanted John to be the new patriarch. However, John was not interested. It should be mentioned that during this time, the Roman rulers, the emperors, had a large influence in the politics of the Christian church. This was probably due to the fact that Constantine had declared Christianity the religion of the empire. So the emperor, who wanted John to be the new patriarch, arranged for him to be kidnapped, as it were, and brought to Constantinople. When John arrived, He then submitted to the emperor and was consecrated Bishop of Constantinople. Among his first tasks were to root out the corruption present in the clergy and high-ranking laity in the imperial court. Much of the clergy and laity lived as the emperor's and privileged class. He cut down the lavish spending of the bishop's household, abolishing the practices of treating the clergy and prominent laity to elegant banquets. The money saved was dedicated to the relief of the poor of the city. He chastised the wealthy by telling them that they would gladly give a chalice or marble statue to the church, but not donate food or medical care to the poor. And he preached the following: do you want to honor Christ's body? Then do not scorn him in his nakedness, nor honor him in the church with silken garments, while neglecting him outside where he is cold and naked. For God does not want golden vessels, but golden hearts. He excluded 2 deacons from the ranks of the clergy, one for murder and the other for adultery. He confined the monks to monasteries because they were wandering about without discipline. In 401 AD, John traveled to Ephesus, where he appointed a new bishop, and with the consent of the assembled bishops, he deposed 6 bishops for simony, the buying or selling of spiritual things. John continued to preach against the excesses and luxury of the clergy and of the privileged classes. The people were delighted with the sermons and frequently applauded him in the church. They never forgot his care for the poor and miserable, and in his first year as bishop, he built a great hospital with the money he had saved from his household. But there was much resentment among the clergy and the privileged class. There was also a bit of jealousy throughout the hierarchy of that time. Prior to the Council of Constantinople, Alexandria had been the greatest seat of Christianity next to Rome. But Constantine had moved the capital to Constantinople, thus making Constantinople the more important Christian city. Theophilus, the bishop of Alexandria, as well as other bishops, felt they were, quote, playing second fiddle to a city that had been no more than a fishing village 70 years earlier. This led to Theophilus and others to dislike John, who was the bishop of Constantinople. And to add to this, the empress, Eudocia, felt that John's preaching about the excessive adornment of women was pointed at her, and she vowed to have John removed. The empress called Theophilus to judge John on 29 trumped-up charges. He, Theophilus, was only glad and willing to take part in this charade since previously he had been summoned to Constantinople on charges that he unjustly excommunicated a group of Egyptian monks. John would not attend the court and called it a kangaroo court. Consequently, he was deposed and exiled. However, just one day after being exiled, there was an earthquake, and the empress saw it as a warning from on high. So John was brought back to Constantinople, but it didn't end there. Only 2 months later, the empress had a silver statue of herself erected directly in front of the cathedral. The dedication celebration deteriorated into revelry and disrupted the divine liturgy that was taking place inside the cathedral. John felt it necessary to speak out against the activities of the empress. Quote, he thundered from the pulpit, "Again Herodias raves. Again she is troubled. She dances again and again desires to receive John's head on a platter." thus comparing the empress to Herodias, who asked for John the Baptist's head on a platter. On Holy Saturday, as John baptized new Christians at the Easter Vigil, troops broke into the church and mixed blood with the baptismal water. John was brutally dragged into remote exile in eastern Turkey. By this time, he was an old man, broken in health, but he was comforted by a steady stream of pilgrims who had traveled from Antioch to pay homage to the one they considered a living saint. In the year 407, the emperor, who was fearful of John's influence over these visitors, had John further exiled to the remote territory east of the Black Sea. On the way to his exile, John died. His last words were, "Glory to God for all things." John Chrysostom was later recognized as one of the three holy hierarchs of the Orthodox Church, and by Catholics as one of the four greatest doctors of the Eastern Church. Due to his great devotion to the sacrament of Christ's body and blood, he is also referred to by many in the West as Doctor of the Eucharist.